Bonjour à tous. Welcome to the Nouvel Esprit podcast. And we are your hosts. I'm Guillermo Moreno.
Jeremy Fonsader.
Okay.
And Charles is with us. And today's episode, we are pleased and excited to have our first guests on the Nouvel Esprit podcast. And our guests, would you please introduce yourselves?
My name's Ona Kiser. I'm an American who lives in Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
I'm also the president and co-founder of a group called Friends of Campos, which supports and raises money for a traditionalist diocese nearby called Campos, which I'm sure we'll get into in more detail.
Please, thank you. And
I am Alessandro Cota, and I am the treasurer of Friends of Campos, and I live in San Antonio, Texas.
excellent, amazing. Now, so today's episode is very exciting because the topic is the Diocese of Campos, and is it in the area of Rio de Janeiro?
So by car, it's about a 4 to 6 hour drive.
Okay.
By plane, it's about half an hour.
Okay,
It's in the northern sort of edge of the state of Rio de Janeiro.
okay,
And you're right on the border with the next state, which is called Espiritu Santo. Some of the towns actually, there's one town even that actually has sort of half of the towns in one state and half in the other.
Yeah, for those who are not familiar with Brazil's geography, Rio de Janeiro is the name of a state in the southeastern region of Brazil, and it's also the name of a city, the capital city, which is famous worldwide. So Campos is in the state of Rio de Janeiro and about 200 miles away from the city of Rio de Janeiro.
excellent. All right, and what it is just absolutely fascinating about the Diocese of Campos is that in this diocese, only the traditional Latin Mass is celebrated. Is that correct?
So it's a really unusual situation because you have basically an entire diocese rebelled and refused to change to the new Mass. This was in the 80s, because up until the 80s, things had been a little bit unenforced and people were doing what they wanted. In the 80s, they had a change of bishop, and the new bishop enforced that everyone must celebrate the new Mass only. And so the many parishes and the community of priests who were really in favor of continuing the old Mass, traditional Mass, said no. And they said no very firmly. And so what actually happened was a very some period of violence, actually, because people were literally physically dragged out of the main church of the city, for example, because they were not going to celebrate the new Mass, physically thrown out, sometimes at gunpoint, sometimes the police were called, there were fights and so forth and so on. It was quite disruptive. And those people then went underground. They started celebrating in people's houses and garages and barns and under mango trees and wherever even in caves, literally, and maintained the tradition as a sort of parallel diocese. And because the parishioners would tend to follow their priest, I mean, there was very much a sense of that sort of sense of pastor. The people were very attached to their communities. You had whole parishes sort of leave and form parallel parishes. And this was, I think, probably a very messy process. It was before my time. But they also then had to start their own seminary because there were seminarians who didn't want to all switch to the new Mass either and were leaving and so forth. Some went to the Sspx seminary in Argentina for some time. They also then sort of started a small seminary in somebody's house there in Campos. And over time, it all sort of became a little more structured and formalized. They built separate churches in all the towns. And then in 2002, their situation was formalized. They came into communion with the church again under Pope John Paul II. And so what you have physically, geographically, is you have the Diocese of Campos, the regular diocese of sort of new Mass diocese. And then you have this second diocese sort of on top of it, which is the traditional diocese. And so in every town, there's at least, depending on the size of the town, there's at least 2 churches. Often there's multiple sort of secondary chapels, because it's a very rural area. So in the countryside, there's often little chapels where all the people who live in that area, who are farmers and things like that, come for Mass. You have Catholic schools that are run by what's now the Apostolic administration of St. John Mary Vianney, which was the name given to the organization after it was formalized with Pope John Paul II. And so each of the towns has its own religious orders, its own schools, its own parishes, and so forth. And then side by side with that are the original church buildings all belong to the I would say the regular diocese that celebrates the new Mass. The degree to which there's a sort of rigid separation varies by town. So there are towns where there are almost no people at all who attend the new Mass. There are other towns where people go to either one just because it's like their friends going to that one, or it's at a more convenient time or whatever. Or they like the priest better, they think his sermons are more interesting or something like that. So the degree to which people are very sort of fussy about it has certainly changed over the generations too, I think, because you tend to find a more ferocious attitude in the older generation who lived through the violence. And the younger generation, and this is speaking up until Traditionis Custodes, right? This year has been a little bit different, but up until recently, there's been a sense that, the Latin Mass is growing, it's very popular among the youth. People go sometimes to either or both, some people only go to one. And the younger generation seems to have sort of been a little bit less fierce about it in general than the older generation. A little bit less of that, like, I will die before they take it from my cold dead hands kind of thing. And I certainly am not speaking for everyone. This is broad generalizations. Now that there's been this new upheaval, I'm sort of still waiting to see where things go. I don't have a clear sense of how things will develop in the future and how much that will be enforced here. It's been enforced in the Diocese of Rio, where I live. I know that it's been enforced. For example, seminarians, new people who have been ordained after a certain year, I think it was 2 years ago or something like that, are not allowed to celebrate the Latin Mass at all. Newer priests are forbidden from it, and a lot of them are interested. There was a growing number of priests graduating from the regular seminary here in Rio, in the city of Rio, who it's not a traditionalist seminary. It's not very supportive of traditional stuff, but there was a growing number in every graduating class, every group of newly ordained priests. There were more and more who were interested in celebrating the Latin Mass, and a growing conservative element. And so the crackdown there, I think, has been probably frustrating for some of them. I don't know, if some are just sort of going underground with that, or I haven't seen a lot of fussing about it, but it's very normal for priests in any group, I think, to be a little bit cautious, especially when they're younger, because any complaints that they put out in public compromise their vocation and make their life under their bishop very miserable. So there probably wouldn't tend to be a general rebellion, for example, at the seminary, even if 80% of them loved the traditional Mass. I don't think there would be a revolution if it were banned. Maybe a small one, I don't know. But going back to the Diocese of Campos, then it's certainly a context in which things are always changing organically. I mean, one of the things that's happened in the last, at least since Pope Benedict, is that they have begun sending priests out to outlying communities that are not part of that diocese. So they celebrate in the city of Belo Horizonte, which is like a 6-hour drive away, in the city of Victoria, which is over in the state of Espírito Santo. Here in in the city of Rio de Janeiro, they send a priest who comes in here several times a weekend on Sundays to celebrate for us. And that outreach is something I think quite difficult for them because they don't have a huge number of priests, and it's a lot of work for them to be driving those kinds of distances. But it's also something that's quite in demand. And the communities in these outlying cities are at least several hundred people. There are on top of all of this, or in addition to all of this, there are in the Diocese of Campos and around the region in the state of Rio de Janeiro, there's also various sedevacantist groups and the Sspx and other sort of quasi-traditionalist groups and things that have various numbers of people involved with them. I know of at least a couple of sort of independent priests who are sort of not really affiliated with any particular group, who celebrate only the Latin Mass, who are very traditionalist, very outspoken, and are kind of just gently ignored by the reigning bishop because it would just cause more of a mess to crack down on them. So they just kind of let them do whatever they want. And so there's a little bit of a tolerance for fringy things too, for better or for worse. I don't know in the long run if those I don't know in the long run how all these things are going to sort of interact over time. And it's kind of interesting to me. I find that kind of thing a little bit more interesting than horrifying. So I don't know. So that gives a little bit of an overview. I lost track of the original question, so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful overview. I guess one question I have is like, we vaguely referenced Vatican II, but I was just kind of wondering what is like the historical progress, starting with like, what was the role of the diocese with Vatican II? And then that led to their moving away from the church, because you said that they left the church and rejoined the church in the 2000s. So I think it would be wonderful if we could dive a little bit into the history of Campos in that regard.
Sure. Oh no, I can, if I can say a few things. Well, I think the central figure in this process is certainly Bishop Antonio Castromyer, right? In 1948, he was appointed Bishop of Campos. And for those who are familiar with the name, Antonio Castromyer was one of the bishops who played an important role in the Second Vatican Council. So he participates, right? Bishop Castromyer participates in the Second Vatican Council from 1962, I believe, to 1968, in various forms. And when he was as a bishop, as a participant under the Second Vatican Council, he began to oppose some modernist tendencies within the council that he identified. So he associated with another bishop, Archbishop Sigo, and they formed a group called Coetus Internationalis Patrum, which was it's a kind of an organization, a group of traditionalists or traditional priests that were basically trying to oppose some of the ideas that were circulating and being discussed within the Vatican Council. That part of that group as well, well, this organization, this Coetus Internationalis Patrum, was founded by Archbishop Lefebvre, that we know it's also the founder of the Society of St. Pius X. And so those are the three main names, right? Archbishop Lefebvre, Archbishop Sigo, and Bishop Meyer. So they were in the Vatican II. They participated in Vatican II. They were opposing many things there. That's how the relationship between Campos and the Sspx also was born, because it was born from this friendship between Castromyer, Bishop Castromyer, and Lefebvre. What else? A little bit more of the history of Campos. So Campos was Castromyer was the Bishop of Campos, participating in the Vatican II. He was writing about the changes, writing and thinking about the changes that the council was proposing, and some of the changes, of course, he didn't agree with, but he was not rebelling against the Pope necessarily. He was not splitting off the church. He was basically making his voice heard, his opinion heard. What else? 1969 is when Pope Paul VI instituted the new Mass. And Castromyer, Bishop Meyer from Campos, he sent a letter to Pope Paul VI asking him to continue to celebrate the Old Mass, right? Ask authorization to continue to celebrate the Old Mass. And he also sent a letter, apparently, explaining the theological reasons why he wouldn't like to celebrate the new Mass. If the majority of the priests of campus continued to celebrate the Old Mass, this was in the 60s, of course, 1969, 97. In 1970, if you remember, is when Lefebvre founded the society, right? The Society of St. Pius X. It was also a moment where Bishop Castromyer and Lefebvre, they were in touch, they were talking, exchanging letters and collaborating in many ways. What else? In the 70s, this collaboration continues. What else? Bishop Castromyer helps, in fact, the society, because at some point, I think in 1975, the society lost its canonical status, could no longer, it was no longer recognized canonically by the church. And Lefebvre asked Bishop Meyer to incardinate some priests, right? So basically since Bishop Castromyer had a diocese and he could do that. And so there was a collaboration, a continuing collaboration between the society and Bishop Castromyer in campus. Those events that Ona referred to happened in 1981, in 1982. The violence, it happened when finally Bishop Castromyer became emeritus. Bishop Emeritus, and he was replaced by a new bishop called Alberto Navarro. And what happened was that when they heard that the new bishop was coming and the new Mass would come to campus, the faithful and the priests, they sent letters, they offered, they asked a number of things from the bishop, things like, can we continue to use the Tridentine Rite? Can we use the Catechism of St. Pius X? Can we enforce, can we continue to fight for demoralization of dress and costumes here in campus? Can we fight communism? Can we make sure that the priests will be wearing the cassocks? And so they basically made a list and asked the bishop to if he would agree with those things. As far as I know, the bishop never responded to that list, never said anything. And in fact, he very shortly, he issued a decree saying that the new Mass will be the only and exclusive Mass to be celebrated in campus. And those priests and those priests that did not comply with the decree, they would suffer certain canonical consequences. And of course, that caused a major problem, as Ona explained. At that point, then it's especially those priests and seminaries that were formed by Bishop Castromyer, they refused to comply with the decree, right? And the people as well. So it's interesting to notice that it was not just a clerical or reaction is the faithful as well. So the people and the priests and the faithful, they refuse to participate, to attend the new mass. They try to keep their parishes for some time, but then Bishop Navarro, once he realized that the priests and the faithful were not complying, he sued them in civil courts to remove the priests from the parishes. So there was a civil court case, and then the police got involved, and then this whole period that Ona referred to, the where things got a little bit physical. Yeah,
Must have been something to live through. I find that like it fascinates me.
Yeah. So what else? I think then they formed, right, during that period. So it was a period where they were disobeying the bishop. They were literally disobeying the bishop, believing in good conscience that they were basically, from a historical point of view, they were doing, well, the bishop is forbidding us to do what we have ever done here, what we have always done here, right? It's basically saying, okay, overnight, it's over. You can't say the mass. You can't live the faith as you have always lived. So that was a reaction, and apparently there was no friendly dialogue, at least.
See, Alessandro, by that time that they were starting to see the results of the Vatican II changes in Brazil in a bad way. Like there were a lot of crazy things starting to happen.
Yeah, that is true. Something that I have been reading a pastoral letter by Bishop Rifan, who is the current bishop of Campos, and he refers to that time exactly as in the terms of as Ona said, like that. They were seeing other parishes, other priests. They were seeing things that they believe were one of the postconciliar effects, and they didn't want to have that in Campos, right? And some of the things were pretty radical and pretty destructive of the church. In fact, they even they even referred to I think Pope Paul VI in an address. They referred to this document. There's an address by Pope Paul VI in which he said, Pope Paul VI said that there was the church. Some people were taking some ideas on the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, and they were destroying the church. It was a kind of a process of self-destruction. There was a literal sentence used by Pope Paul VI, and they were worried about that. And it was difficult, I think, for everybody, not only for Campus, but for everybody. Difficult times.
Yeah, I guess my question now is, we got this history from Vatican II to now we have the fight, right? We have the rebellion against Bishop Navarro, and we have this kind of almost civil war within the church. So then where did the people go? Like, where did they join the Sspx? Did they do their own thing? What did they do now that they're not obeying the bishop?
Oh, no. Do you
No,
want
I mean, like Father Adilson, who celebrates here, for example, said he was talking about some of his memories of the time. It's like they would literally, like all the people who had been thrown out of the parish, such and such, would meet on Sunday morning under a mango tree in some farmer's field, and they would celebrate mass there. Or there was another group that when they'd lost their church building, they celebrated in somebody's barn or in somebody's garage, wherever they could, in someone's living room. And so they would regroup in other buildings until over time they began to build their own churches on private property, right? Because you can build whatever you want on private property. And so all around the diocese now are often sort of Gothic style churches, hand built by the parishioners of those communities over the years. Some of them still quite things are built slowly here because of the poverty. And so there's things that they're still getting little details worked out, still working on but that's certainly I mean, I think I have to say I sort of admire that courage. It's like not waiting for anyone else to deal with the problem. It's like, if you're going to throw us out of our churches, we're going to build new churches over here, and we're going to keep on going, and you can't stop us, you know.
Yeah, if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, if I remember correctly, there was at some point after the rebelling priests, so to speak, they were taken out, they were removed from their parishes.
Right.
They were replaced with new priests, and the faithful simply would not go. The churches were emptied for some time. So the new priests will be there, but to celebrate the new mass, and nobody would show up to mass because they were going to those other masses.
Yeah, that seems to, I mean, over time, that seems to have moderated a bit. It varies by town. There were some towns where very few people attend the new mass even today, and others where it's probably more half and half or something.
Yeah,
but it wasn't until 2002 that they came into communion. So it was a 20-year period of disruption.
One thing that I want to call your attention to is that the 60s, right? We're focused on, of course, we focus on the Second Vatican Council and the reforms and many of the abuses that happened after the council for different reasons. But it's also interesting to notice that the 60s in Brazil, those years were a period of many difficulties in terms of politics and culture, right? So Brazil was facing the possibility of becoming a communist country, right? There were guerrilla fighters. There was a threat, an imminent threat of a civil war in Brazil. And of course, there was the military coup in 1964. So the whole country was, there was also a famous, I don't remember the year, I think 1962, I might be wrong about this, but there was this famous march demonstration organized by the TFP and many other Catholic groups, like a million people or so were demonstrating in the streets against communism in favor of a more Catholic culture. So it was a period of a lot of upheaval in Brazil. So if you put this whole situation of campus into that context, you can see that they are looking around and say, well, the whole country seems to be on the brink of a civil war, or at least of a communist revolution. What's going to happen? And then the church is changing as well. It was not. Those times were not easy to live through.
I wanted to, on that note, Alessandro, I read the other day that during that period, the TFP collected over 1 million signatures on a petition to the Pope, begging him to take out from Brazil the foreign priests who were coming in and bringing liberation theology and communist ideology, and imposing it into the church, especially there was, I guess, a lot of priests coming from Germany and places like that, and they never got an answer. But I was thinking, you know, nowadays we send a petition to the Pope asking for this parish to remain open or that, and it's like maybe 400 people sign it or something, or 40 people sign it. And over 1 million people signed a petition and they got no response. And I thought, oh.
Yeah, no, it was in the Bishop Castromyer was friends or had a close relationship with Plínio Correia de Oliveira, who was the founder of the TFP, right? They were working closely together. So it was a difficult time in terms of culture and politics as well.
Rather briefly, what is the TFP?
The TFP, go ahead.
Is it the tradition, family, and property?
Traditional family and property, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify for our audience what you were referring to.
Great. Yeah, it was founded in Brazil, right? It was founded by Plínio Correia de Oliveira, but if I remember correctly, Bishop Castromyer was. He became, while still a priest, he became a partner, and he played an important role in the organization as well, in the traditional family and property. Later on, he would, I think, in campus as well. They would go their separate ways because of some differences, but at the very beginning they were working in collaboration because for many reasons. One of the reasons is that there was the growth of communism. I don't know if it can. South America, Latin America had, in the 20th century always was, not always, but that's an unfair generalization, but there was the danger of becoming a communist country like Cuba, right? It was very present. Sometimes in America, we talk about socialism and the government is becoming more socialist and the culture is becoming more socialist. Yes, that is true in many senses. But in South America, we're talking about like Cuban socialism, like a government, a revolution in the 60s, like a military, like guerrilla fighters taking over control of a whole country and changing things in a communist direction.
I
right?
think that kind of the communism of that era, which isn't maybe what we think of nowadays, was to like confiscate all of the property, for example, and redistribute it and things like that, like they have in in China and Cuba and whatnot. And thus the culture wars here at that time were different than in the US, where I think things were more to do with dress and behavior and music and that kind of thing. Race.
Yep. Thank you for that. I guess another question I have then is just these people that are, that make up the Diocese of Campos, like what type of people are they? Because when we talk about the Latin Mass in the United States, normally the people that are going to the Latin Mass, talking about it, seeking it out, they are usually intellectually inclined. They talk about it on the internet, they're reading books about it, they're reading church documents, they're trying to dive into the topic. And just what is kind of the mentality of these people? What kind of a diocese is it?
I could just say from my first impressions that one of the things that totally blew my mind was going there and being in rural chapels. And like when the priest goes out and rings the bell, farmers walk, like farmers, you're not farmers with like a tractor and 500,000 acres and a big old herd of cattle, like a guy with a hoe and bare feet come walking up out of the fields. And they stand in the chapel, and the women stay on one side and men on the other normally. And the women are standing in the back praying their rosaries, and the men will take off their hats and kneel down. And it's just like really regular people, like rural people. And in the towns, obviously, you have professionals, you have dentists and janitors and doctors and taxi drivers and teachers and all kinds of people. And it was it's actual parishes, like if you go to a live parish where there's actually every kind of person, it's that. And they have the children's group and the little banners and the Christmas play and the whole thing. And it's not what I would have always encountered, because I tend to assist at the Mass in bigger cities. So I had gone to Latin Mass in London and in New York and in Rio and in Sao Paulo and places like that, in Madrid and things like that. And there you're getting a completely different group, because it's people from the city who are coming from all over the city just for that. And it does tend to be then more young intellectuals, college educated, aware of things on the internet and so forth. But it was, I think, especially because one of the things I recall hearing here at least, is that one of the reasons for some of the changes at the Second Vatican Council is because the common folk couldn't understand. And these people, I mean, they don't know Latin grammar, and they've never taken they may not even really read very well, some of the more rural people, but their piety blows mine out of the water. I mean, that's like, there's no comparison. Their faith is incredible. And you realize that it's not just it's clearly, obviously, and historically never been simply a faith for intellectuals. And it's a little bit of a distorted view that you get when you're limited to that one experience, you know. Alessandro, have you had that?
Yeah, I think my let me just give some background related to my experience with campus. So I grew up in Brazil. I lived in Brazil until I was up to I think it was 28. I was 28 when I left Brazil and came to the United States. And up to during the time I was living in Brazil, up to that time, I heard about campus. There was not much information on the internet, obviously, about campus at the time. So I heard about them, I heard things about them, but it was all a blur. I didn't understand exactly what campus was or what they were doing, and what role they were playing in the bigger scheme of things. So after I finally visited campus when I went back to Brazil 3-4 years ago. It was for the first time. I was involved already in the with Friends of Campos, with Ona and the organization, trying to help them, but I had never been there. So I told Ona, said, "Well, you have to go there. You have to see it yourself, see what's going on there." And I finally went. So I was in Brazil. I went to campus, and I was absolutely astonished. It was amazing, right? It was amazing. It was kind of one of those mind-changing experiences. One of the reasons was that I had been attending a traditional parish in Richmond, Virginia, a wonderful parish. It's basically where there's an important period of my life where I grew in faith. I became a much more serious Catholic, at least I think. And then when I went to campus, what I saw was, okay, this is not. I was expecting like, okay, a traditional diocese, a traditional Catholic diocese. I was thinking about, because of my experience with traditional parishes in America, I was like, okay, I was thinking about something like that. I got there, it was not like that, right? It was basically almost like going back in time. That's the way I explain it. It's like, oh, this is how the church was. This is what the church was before, like in the 50s and the 40s and before. People, regular people, ordinary people going to mass. One of the things that this is a story that I was surprised to see this. I never saw this in America, even in traditional parishes that I attended. A priest would, in campus, would see things like this. A priest would walk out of the church after mass just to talk with people, and the faithful would kneel down and kiss their hands, ask for their blessing, for the priest's blessing, like naturally, nothing artificial about that. It was just the way they lived, that's how what they were taught, and that's how they live their faith, right? So it is not. It is like campus is an impoverished area in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Of course, there are people that belong to different classes with different levels of education, but in general, what I saw was regular, ordinary people from the countryside, the Brazilian countryside, going to attend the mass, the traditional mass. And traditional liturgy is not only the mass; it's all the different forms of public liturgy. The liturgy.
They keep all the processions and the feasts and.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this one of the things that I noticed is that I didn't notice anything like even though there's this history of a violent resistance, a violent expelling from parishes, I didn't see any kind of bitterness there, any kind of a spirit of suspicion and bitterness. It is just like, okay, we're living our life, we're living our Catholic life. This is our church, these are our priests, this is what being. So that's why I refer to it as like going back in time. Like, okay, so it felt like, okay, this is Brazil from the 40s. This is Brazil, and these are Catholics from the 1940s, and this is how the church was. It looked like it didn't change. Of course, it's just a manner of speaking. It's not literally that, but that was an impression that I had, that especially in comparison with my experience in America. So it is beautiful to see because it's unique, and it is beautiful to see also because of what Ona said, that it's not it's not true that or not entirely true that the traditional, the Latin Mass and the Latin liturgy, alienates people or makes people not participate or not fully participate in their en mass or in the liturgy. It's not true. I think Campos is a great testimony of that. Simple people, they participate, they're pious, they're devoted, but not ideologically. I think are in a sense that they are. It's a lived faith. It's not so much an intellectual faith.
I think there's something really interesting there in seeing too the parts of the faith that are harder to come by when you go to a city church, which is like a traditionalist church in a city that I've had experience with, which is that, for example, they do these procession for Our Lady of Aparecida, the patron of Brazil, and everyone decorates the front of their house in a little town, and the procession passes by, and you decorate the front of your house to honor her. Or the priests go from house to house at certain times of year to do house blessings. And the people wait in front and have something ready, to welcome him and let him in. That the catechism is done by the religious sisters. And that there is the things like the theater for the children, the Christmas pageants and stuff or the story of Adam and Eve and the fall and all that, all acted out by teens in costume. And they're not cynical. This is one of the things I think this is more of maybe a general Brazilian characteristic, not cynical yet, not like in the US, and you still have in that region, and still even in much of Brazil compared to the US, extended people living in extended family. And that has a huge impact on how people function, how community functions. I stayed with a family there when they had 3 generations around a courtyard, and so the kid, and you go to the church and there's the old ladies and there's babies and there's young people, but there's also middle-aged people with older kids and teens and so forth and so on. So you have the whole range of kinds of people together. And I think that builds, it's the old ladies who will like pat the seat next to them and say, come sit with me, when the stranger comes in. The young men don't do that as much. So there's a kind of welcome there and a very different spirit. For better or for worse, I'm sure living in that kind of community can be quite stressful too in its own ways. But
of course, that is something that I noticed in just everything that you've been sharing, that there is actually a diversity in the Diocese of Campos. In the end, what the piety, it's just there, it's completely there, and that's excellent. That's wonderful. And one question I have is, on top of this, so this diocese, it's not it's not in an irregular canonical status, is it?
it's not anymore. No.
Okay, because my question is, if it's in the end, hey, we're traditionalists in the sense that this is our kind of way of life. You can't just take the TLM from us. Okay, I understand. Great. Why wouldn't Sspx and other groups follow this bishop and become part of this diocese rather than remain in these other groups?
Yeah, I want to say something, Zona, if you want to help me with that. But I think going back to the history of Campos.
Personal spats, I think, is the answer.
Really?
Go ahead, Alessandro. You're better at the details than I am.
So as far as I know, the first, let me see here. Okay, how do I begin? I know where. So so remember that back in the 80s, I mentioned that a group of priests that were trained were formed by Castromyer, Bishop Castromyer. They decided to form this. Decided 30 priests or so decided not to disobey the new bishop, right? And they formed a society. They formed an association, which is society. I think the Portuguese word is união. União means union, but I don't think it translates well as union in English. It's more like association or something. An association of priests, association of Saint John Mary Vianney. So they were this, and they of course. They begin to create new chapels. They were trying to run things as they were before, and they didn't have a bishop, of course, right? Because they were in a state of disobedience in relation to the new bishop. They didn't have a bishop. They were growing, running parishes, that in chapels. At some point, they needed a bishop to be consecrated. This is back in 1991 already, right? From the 80s to 1991. So this group of bishops, this group of priests, they asked the Sspx, they asked Monsieur Lefebvre to consecrate one of them as a bishop, right? So there was this moment in the 90s where the Sspx consecrated one of those priests as a bishop, right? Remember, this is in the 90s was the moment of crisis between one of the biggest moments of crisis between the Sspx and the church as well. But this new bishop that was consecrated by the Sspx, Bishop Rangel, he wrote even during that time that he saw, and Campos in general saw, their situation as being extraordinary, right? That's their understanding. In good conscience, they said our situation is extraordinary, and they saw it as temporary. They said not being in union with the church, not being part of the having this conflict with the church is not something that they regarded as something that would last forever, right? It would be a long lasting situation. So even during that time, they thought and believed that when the circumstances change, we're going to go back, right? So there was the spirit from the beginning, even during the time when they asked the Sspx to consecrate one of them as a bishop, because they needed to have a bishop. So I think this is an important difference. I can't talk about why the Sspx didn't do or didn't follow the same path. I'm sure they have their own reasons, but with Campos, with the priests and Campos, that was the situation. So bishop, there's a new bishop in Campos, then 1991, Bishop Rangel, and he promised that he would surrender his position as a bishop to the Pope when the circumstances changed. Little by little, gradually during the 90s and the early 2000s, there were many things happening in Campos, and many, especially in terms of contacts with the Vatican, contact with the Holy See, and they were, Bishop Rifa in his pastoral letter refers to a moment in which a time in which they were reading and restudying many things about the position of the church, the position of the Vatican, the position of the right interpretation and the right interpretation of the documents from the Second Vatican Council. So they were re-examining their position, and in the 90s and the early 2000s, it's not the 60s anymore, right? So they're not. Brazil is no longer under the threat of becoming like a communist country as it was in the 60s. They were not in the middle of the upheaval, the post-conciliar upheaval. They're not in a necessarily conflictuous position. So during those times, they restudied and re-examined many documents. They just to give you an example. That they themselves refer to, well, remember in 1992, you have the Catechism of the Catholic Church is published. And of course, they studied the new catechism. There's certain positions, there's certain writings by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, Dominus Jesus in 2000, and some other writings by the congregation. So they were reading and studying what the church was saying about the abuses, about things that were going on in the church. So there was a process of, I guess, growing and understanding in campus. So again, just to review, so the Bishop Rangel, even though he was consecrated by the Sspx, from the beginning he said, "This is not forever. When circumstances change, I will surrender my bishopry, my position as a bishop to the Pope." And during the 90s and 2000 and the early 2000s, they were restudying and re-examining and following the words of the Vatican closely to understand what the church was saying about what they saw, the crisis that happened in the post-conciliar period. And finally, in the year 2000, right, Pope John Paul II, he appointed a Cardinal Castromyer, to start a dialogue with Campos, right? So the Pope was concerned with Campos, right? So there was a dialogue. There was a cardinal especially appointed to start a conversation, to start a negotiation with Campos. In the same year, in 2000, many priests of Campos went to Rome to participate in the Anno Santos pilgrimage, right? And at the end of that year, the Holy See finally makes an offer of reconciliation. So the early 2000s were really a period where Campus and the Vatican began to approach each other and negotiate and talk. And the year 2001 was the year where Campus began to take some decisive steps to rejoin the church, in a sense. So finally, at the end, I think it was September, the date that I have is September 11th of 2001, Cardinal Castillon presents, Cardinal Castillon reads a letter sent by the priests of Campos to Pope John Paul II. So they finally, in 2001, Campos sends a letter, an official letter to Pope John Paul II, and Cardinal Hoyos reads the letter to Pope John Paul II. Apparently, he even cried when he heard the letter being read out loud. And then the Pope promised, right? Pope responded with another letter saying, "I want you to rejoin, and I'll promise you a special legal status in the church, a special canonical status that will protect the way you live your Catholic faith," meaning the traditional liturgy. So you will have a special status to continue your apostolate of living the faith in the according to the old Roman ritual. So and Pope John Paul II, he did that in 2002. Cardinal Hoyos, the cardinal appointed to negotiate with Campos, he comes back to Campos with a decree. It's called Animarum Bonum, in which the personal apostolic administration of St. John Mary Vianney is established. So Campus, the canonical status of Campus today is that of a personal apostolic administration, which is similar to a diocese. It's not a diocese, but it's similar. As Ona used a beautiful image, like it's like one diocese on top of the other. There is the regular diocese of Campus with a bishop, and on top of that, there is the old diocese of Campus with the traditional mass, with its own bishop and with its own faithful. So it's a personal diocese. The church has many personal apostolic administration. So their jurisdiction is not territorial, it's personal, meaning the bishop of Campus has authority over all those faithful whose expression of, whose the Catholic devotion is expressed through, they find the traditional liturgy, the way for them to express the faith. So just to give you one other two examples, I think the church has other personal apostolic administrations. I think the military ordinariate is one. So the military ordinariate is also a personal apostolic administration when they have a bishop and the bishop presides over the people, Catholic, military, and their families, right? That's the bishop's jurisdiction. And the exarchates of the Eastern Rite, I think, are also personal apostolic administrations. So all those Catholics who live their faith through the Eastern rites, they also have live under a personal apostolic administration. So to sum it up, it is regular, it is canonical, it was granted by Pope John Paul II. It is something that Campos, from the beginning, since those times where they were basically having a new bishop consecrated by the Sspx, something that they desired, right? You see in this bishop, you see that in this letter, there's a letter that was published by Bishop Rifan, the current bishop, when Campos completed 10 years, when this apostolic administration completed 10 years. In this letter, Bishop Rifan makes it very clear that even though they resisted the reforms and they rebelled, and there was a strong rebellion, not rebellion, but a strong resistance against some of the reforms, it was never the intention to split, to cause a schism, to leave the church. The intention was, we're going to do this exceptionally, and we're going to wait for the circumstances to change. When circumstances change, we will go back, right? And this is what happened, I guess, in the early 2000s with their negotiations. Yeah.
I have one quick question. What happened to the bishop that the SSPX consecrated?
Oh, good question. He received regular canonical status. If I remember correctly, Pope John Paul II validated his canonical status. If that's to the best of my recollection, that's what happened, right? So he was also in the process of regularizing the canonical status of Campos, the bishop. So he became the first officially and canonically regular bishop of the personal apostolic administration. So Campos, the new Campos, let's say, the personal apostolic administration that was founded, officially recognized by the church in 2002, has had two bishops so far, right? Bishop
the first, right?
Yeah. So Bishop Licinio Rangel from 2001 to 2002. So that was the bishop that had been consecrated by the SSPX. He was welcomed back into the church and maintained his consecration as bishop was validated. And then from 2002 up to the present, we have Bishop Fernando Rifa, right? He has been the bishop since then.
All right. Thank you for that. That was wonderful and beautiful. Just the piety of these people. It's a mind-blowing story. Charles, did you have any questions? Been kind of lurking there.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you so much, Mr. Cota, Ms. Kiser, for sharing some time with us this morning. What a wonderful story, beautiful observations and insights about Campos. Yeah, I guess I had one question. You have a particular interest in the modern world and the effects of modernity, things of this nature. I know Mr. Cota's, get into this a bit, but just listening to your observations of the community in Campos, I was wondering what the modern church can learn. I mean, of course, this is in fact modern. This is happening now. It's still happening. But what can, considering a kind of what I might consider some fragmentation in the church. What can the modern church or Catholic sophisticates, Catholic intellectuals, people that really love documents and theology, what can they learn from the community at Campos? I mean, I know you guys have already sort of said a few things, but if you could just say a bit more about that, I think that's very important in terms of a kind of faith that's more than just intellectual.
I think one of the interesting things there is the non sort of paraliturgical stuff. Like, I think it makes a really big difference to Catholic life in general, and this would count in any kind of church, any category of Catholic church. But to have those the groups of Marian devotion and the groups of devotion to the Sacred Heart, and the groups that put on the processions, and the groups that put on the theater, and the groups that do the children's choir and the women's choir and the men's choir, and they're all separate, right? And that sort of thing. So these sort of activities that revolve, the social activities and community activities that spring out of a lived faith, the luncheons and this sort of thing too, you know, so that the going to church is not, or especially going to mass, is not an isolated activity. And these are things that have, I'd say in the urban traditionalist churches I've gone to, this, it tends to be the case that people sort of go to mass and then they go home. What they do there, I have no idea, because I don't know any of them outside of the actual context of the parish. And this varies by parish. Here in Rio, it's people come quite long distances. And so they tend not to socialize outside of mass. And there's often not a place to socialize outside of mass because of the urban setting is a little bit rough sometimes. And that's very different when the church and the parish is the center of the community, and people spend hours a week there participating in things, helping build things, cleaning it, you know, even things like that, like having, and you have this sometimes at the local parish here in my neighborhood, which is New Mass, obviously. You've got the little old ladies puttering around all the time. You know what I mean? So you've got the men doing stuff over here and the girls doing stuff over there and the boys doing stuff over there. Sometimes not so Catholically, depending on the parish, but that involvement of people in the daily stuff, I think, makes a huge difference. So that the church is taken home and the home is taken into the church, and the community is sort of participates together in that. What was the case with your church in Richmond, Alessandro? Because you said your sons were involved there more in things, right? Your children.
Yeah, and the parish that I attended in Richmond, Virginia, was something like that, something like Campos. In fact, it was a parish that was completely devoted to the traditional liturgy, and there was a community already, right? There was a community that was formed around the parish because it had been there for 30 years. So when we got there, when my family joined the parish, there was already, you know, the many families, and they're socialized after mass, and many of the families lived nearby the church, right? It was kind of as I think one way of putting it is that that kind of community centered, gravitating around the parish was already formed in that traditional parish in Richmond. So I saw a little of that, even though Richmond is nothing like Campos, right? Richmond is in terms of, you know, its wealth and culture.
Mm-hmm.
So there was already a community being formed, or information around the parish. And of course, many families traveled 1-2 hours to come to mass. So I think, you know, and there was the same spirit, right? What I saw was, look, I grew up in the 80s, right? So I was born in 1977, grew up in the 80s in Brazil, and up to 2000 and, let me see here, up to 2005, no, more than that. So up to 2008, I think, I had never been to a traditional liturgy, a traditional mass, a Tridentine mass. I grew up in in going to parishes and being a member of church of parishes and working in the Catholic Church, volunteering my work in the Catholic Church in many senses, but not without knowing what the church was before. That was my honesty to literally what happened in Brazil. As people didn't talk about it, we just lived our lives and do whatever we need to do in the new context of the reforms. And so I kind of have the experience also of being a Catholic that was born and raised within the context of Vatican II. To me, what is interesting is that there are many people that I met, that I know from the time I was living in Brazil, that they're faithful, pious, and live their faith. But when I joined the traditional parish in Richmond, what I saw was many people who really put their faith at the very center of their lives. Like everything was informed by faith. I had never experienced like something like that strong. Of course, my experience is just my experience, is limited. It's just my personal story. I don't want to generalize for everybody, but that was my experience. I've met some people that had piety and they were trying to be good Catholics before, but that with that intensity of living the faith, changing their houses, change the way they raise their children, change the way they dress, change the way they do things in every day in a very beautiful and pious way. That is something that I saw going to the traditional parish in Catholic parish in Richmond, and I saw the same thing in campus as well. Right, this kind of, you really become part. Again, this is just my experience, but you see, like you feel and become part of the mystical body of Christ in a very powerful way. Right, it's not just going to mass. It's not just checking that box. Everything becomes informed. Right. It's becoming part of another body, of a holy body, right? And that's something that I saw in both places and in campus as well.
Awesome. And just a little bit about we have very few traditional Latin Mass communities in Los Angeles, but we do. And I know on my end, I do hope and pray for the traditional Latin Mass to spread, to grow, and for more people who just who've never gone to it, to please go see for yourself what it's like. We might, and I think average, quote unquote, in just the mainstream Catholic world, yes, I think I didn't even know that we still had TLM until a few years ago, in my mid-20s or something, or late 20s, I should say. No, mid-20s. And yeah, I just off the top of my head, there's just a lack of awareness. And I think just something that we could all do and should do is invite others to the traditional Latin Mass. Just speaking from us here in our respective dioceses. Those are my thoughts on in that realm. But yes, does anyone have any other thoughts, questions, and so forth?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all again for being here. And then just as one follow-up to the comment from Mr. Cota here about and also Ms. Kiser about this sort of the church being that central sort of nucleus of the community, a kind of some comments about the kind of integration of oneself into the church as opposed to integrating the church into one's own life, as it were, as some, we only do this on Sunday, or is it, just something that we do, Christmas, Easter, or something like this. But actually a lived experience that's informed by the centrality of of being a part of the mystical body of Christ. I thought that was very beautiful, and it's very appropriate for our listeners to hear. And, I think that's truly where I thought that's what the aspiration was, right? Like of the church, is that we actually become part of the body, as opposed to just trying to fit it into what our lives, or we think our lives are, right? And I thought it's a very powerful observation and insight, and something to meditate upon. I know I've benefited from becoming, more integrated into the church and a lived experience, rather than trying to just make it a hobby or just something that's expected.
Yeah, the what I say, just a couple of things, quick comments. Yeah, I think that's the main thing, right? The idea that you're not going to be the same when you're baptized, you become part of the mystical body of Christ. You're going to be transformed if you let yourself be transformed, if you allow God to do that. God has to be, you need to invite him. So I think that experience is very strong. It's something that I don't want to say that all parishioners are perfect and they all go to Latin Mass, they're perfect and trying to do that, but I saw I myself went through this, growing in this kind of awareness, and I saw people doing the same thing in those contexts. And I remember, I just want to share one little piece of experience. I remember the first time I attended a traditional Latin Mass, like when I entered the church, first time in my life, I was like 30 something. I entered the church and I saw women wearing veils and the men quietly waiting for the Mass to start. The Mass starts, and then it was a high Mass, remember, and they begin to sing the procession. They begin to sing the priest processing to the church, and the whole atmosphere, the whole. I even find it hard to describe as an aesthetic experience, because it's not only an aesthetic experience; it's more than that. I remember that clearly. That first time I went to this Mass and I experienced that, I couldn't believe it. I literally began to cry, like, oh, this is like a Mass in heaven. This is not earthly anymore, right? It's something special here. I remember that experience very clearly. One of the things is, this is my home. I have to be here, right? Anyway, just a little experience.
And it's something real.
Yeah.
It's not like contrived, or it's not like scripted or something like this. This is like real. This is reality. This has been reality for thousands of years, by the way.
Yeah. If you don't mind, we talked so much about campus. If we have time, I would like Ona to talk a little bit about the Friends of Campos, because we have Ona and I were part, because when we introduced ourselves, we're part of this organization. We're trying to help campus. If you don't mind, myself.
No, please do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ona,
And also tell us how we can support your project. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had met, when I first started going to the TLM here in Rio, I'm a bit of an auntie, and I had befriended some seminarians who were serving at the Mass. And I started going to visit the seminary, which was just sort of, I don't know why they let me in. The funny American shows up, and she's like auntie to several of the seminarians. So they would just give me a room under the stairs that was like an unused guest room, and had a separate entrance and whatnot, and just leave me there, and I'd eat in a separate room. And it was this sort of, I think now looking back, very odd. But they seemed kind of charmed by the fact that this American lady wanted to sort of come visit the seminary. And as time went on, what happened was I went and did the Summer Institute classes in Norcia for 2 years, and which was not hosted by the monks the Benedictine monks there, but it was in Norcia, Italy. There's a traditionalist Benedictine monastery, and it mostly contains Americans. It was founded by an American. And I went to some classes that were held in that, theology classes about St. Thomas Aquinas that were held in that town. This is in before COVID and before the earthquake. I don't remember the years now. So I got to know some of the monks there. And to my surprise, some years later, one of the monks there is from Campos. Some years later, I got a call from this Brazilian monk in Norte saying that he was bringing his superiors, and they needed to do an ordination, and they were coming to Campos so that Bishop Rifan could do the ordination, because I guess the local bishop there in Italy was not supportive. So they had found us a traditionalist bishop who would do the ordination in the traditional rite. And could I meet them at the airport and help them navigate getting to Campos? Because they weren't exactly, you have to rent a car, you have to speak Portuguese, you have to deal with this and that and the other thing. And so I helped them do the transfer. And then a couple of years later, they came back to do the same thing again. And I helped them with the transfer again and went with them to Campos. And it was on that second visit that Father Benedict, who's now the prior, said, have you ever thought of like running a nonprofit to help them fundraise? Because it's so poor. Like, they're working on, at the time they were working on putting it on the third floor so they could have more dorm rooms and things like this, and expanding the library, which was all sort of just books stored in closets. And the progress was so painfully slow. And we thought, Americans love to donate money to causes overseas. So we actually, me and Father Benedict then set up we got Alessandro on board to be treasurer. No, in the beginning, we had another monk as treasurer temporarily. So we found Alessandro. And we have now also another board member, Grace, who is Brazilian American. And we set up the organization, officialized everything, and have now for 3 years been able to collect donations from Americans who can get tax deduction because it's a official nonprofit, and offered that money to down here to help finish the roof and finish the fourth floor and furnish the dorm rooms and build out the library and buy musical instruments for one of the convents and like all sorts of things. It's the amount of progress they've been able to make with that little extra help, and it's not a huge amount. It's been really impressive. Made me really happy to see that. Hello, I see a little child in the background.
Yeah, sorry about that. They find their way here.
Yeah. So anyway, then that's been going on for 3 years now, I think. And especially getting through COVID, which was very difficult, and getting the main building projects done so that the seminary is finally an actual quadrangle. I mean, it was started out with one brick wall at a time, and when did they start building? In 2004, they started building on some donated land. It was 2016 before they actually finished the current chapel and had it to a functional state. They're still working on some details around that, doing the exterior and stuff like that. So we've been able to move things along a little bit, and that's been really nice to see. It's nice to see some good work getting done.
Yeah, one of the so our website of our organization is friendsofcampos.org. You can visit and see a little bit of our history, a little bit about campus. There's a blog.
Yeah, we put up news once in a while. There's a newsletter you can sign up for.
Yeah, there's one of the sections of the website is about projects and donation campaigns, so you can see where the money is going to, right? So what is the project that we're trying? For instance, one of the projects that we have now, it's kind of important, is support our seminary. So,
almost none of the seminarians can afford to pay tuition.
Yeah,
because it's a very rural region. A lot of them come from very poor families or working class families and can't pay any tuition at all. So the seminary really relies on donations just for food, basically food, electricity, gasoline for the car so the priest can drive 6 hours to celebrate and so forth.
Yeah, there is this thing about campus that I think we didn't mention. We mentioned that campus is an impoverished area. It is, and what it means in terms for the purpose of our mission and the mission of our organization is that, well, it's an impoverished area in campus, as the Apostolic administration of St. John Mary Vianney also suffers from the same, lack of resources. So when we say please support campus, sometimes we're just basically asking, oh, they need food. They need bricks to they need lamps, or it's very basic in a sense, right?
Pharmacy item, aspirin, things like that.
Yeah. And just to remind you of the even though it's a big operation they have, it's not a small operation, but it's impoverished. So they have, I believe the numbers are approximate, but I believe they serve about 40,000 people there. They have 14 parishes, 11 schools. They run 11 schools, 5 rectories. They have 37 priests, 32 seminarians. They have 3 convents and 3 religious houses. It's a big operation. And they have also 2 orphanages and 2 senior homes. So it's a big operation. They're serving 40,000 people in total. They also serve in other 12 different dioceses by invitation. Other bishops ask priests to go there and serve. So it's a big operation. It's not a small, like a little organization of priests. It's a big operation, but also that lacks a lot of. It's a big operation that serves a lot of people and lacks funds and basic things.
They do a rotation around the diocese for which parish is responsible for donating food that month, like rice and beans, the basics. Farmers sometimes give them a calf, because there's dairy farmers that cull the male calves, that give those to the seminary, and they have a pasture out in back. They put the calves out there till they're 2 or 3 years old and then butcher them for meat. And so it's quite rustic by American standards. There was funny stories around that too, like the time the director of the seminary drove way out to a rural chapel to celebrate some feast day. And when he was getting his things out of the trunk, to his chasuble and his briefcase and things out of the trunk of the car, a farmer came up with a dead pig over his shoulders and threw it into the trunk. He's like, there's your payment. It's like, thank you, Father, for coming to celebrate. And then he's like, what are the police going to think if they stop me and see blood dripping out of the back?
All right. Okay, great.
That was
Thank
a
you
bad
for
story.
sharing.
That was a terrible story to end on. You have to have
No,
another one.
no, it gives us
That's charity. It's supernatural.
yes. Yes, all right. And just one more time, friendsofcampus.com.
.org.
.org.
Okay. And Campos, CAMPOS.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Great. And Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
I just want to say we'll have the information on how to support the Friends of Campos in this podcast description to make it easier for our listeners.
Awesome.
Thanks very much for that.
Yeah, and no,
We
just thank
appreciate you
you.
having us on.
Oh, thank you for coming. Thank you. It's been a blessing. And yes, does anybody have any final remarks, thoughts, comments?
I only want to say thank you for joining us on our show. Thank you for your time. I learned a lot from this. I am just appreciative of everything you've had to share with us.
Yes, God bless you. And we'll be praying for the Diocese of Campos. And we ask
you.
our audience to pray for the Diocese of Campos as well. And yep, and to our audience. So yeah, thank you once more, Alessandro and Ona, for joining us. And our audience, thank you all for tuning in. We bid you adieu.
Adieu.
Adieu. Thank you very much for having us.
Bye,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Bye-bye.